Hi there, it's Bill with the Doomer Bloomer podcast. Now, if you're a listener to the show, you know that I've been doing this for a long time. But now there's an easier way to make a podcast. If you haven't heard about Anchor, let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or phone. The Anchor app will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Cheers. We're live. Welcome to the Doomer Bloomer podcast with Will S. We're profiling the hero's journey, the resurrection of good ideas, and the 10 pillars, weekly episodes. Today on the podcast, I have Mike Messier, all the way from Jacksonville, Florida. How are you doing this afternoon there, Mike? How are things in Florida?
Hey, Will, things are great, man. It's about 80 degrees out. People are starting to get vaccinated, and things are happening. So things are coming along pretty well for me here in Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm glad to be on your show today, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for connecting. We Matchmaker is like the Tinder for podcasts.
Yeah, I would like to give a shout out. You know, I'm not sure who created that podcast platform. For anyone that's looking to host a podcast or to be on a podcast, the Matchmaker FM is a pretty good resource for that.
Yeah, man, they're the tools are just getting better and better all the time. I'm sure you're well aware of that. Tell me a little bit of what you do and who you are for our guests and listeners there, Mike.
Well, I'm a filmmaker. I'm an acting coach. I'm an actor. I do a lot of things. I write screenplays. I've hosted a television show that people can see on my YouTube channel called Mike Messier Mantra. I think I've won a total of 41 awards in screenwriting and filmmaking and TV of various kinds. I think one of those awards was even for photography. That was kind of a new thing for me. So, ultimately, I guess if people are intrigued by what we're talking about today and they want to know more about me or enjoy some of my work, I would probably guide them to Mike Messier YouTube channel, which I think right now is officially titled Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. And then I would also encourage them to look into my novel, A Distance from Avalon, When the Dying and the Dead Reunite, which is technically a Gothic novel, a Gothic horror novel, although I'd like to think that people that don't like to read a lot of fiction in particular would find this a book that's enjoyable to read and would probably take about 2 hours to read by most accounts. And MikeMessier.com, if nothing else, you know. So I have a lot of material that's available for people to enjoy for free right now on the old World Wide Web there.
www.MikeMessier.com.
Yeah, www.MikeMessier.com. Yeah, definitely.
I checked it out a little bit this morning. I'm going to finish your Disregard the Vampire documentary a little later today.
Thanks.
No worries. You're not related to Jack Black, are you?
No, you know, I like Jack Black. I mean, it's funny, man, you know, with my physical look, I've been compared to a lot of guys, and it's always somewhere like Dan Aykroyd, Jack Black, you know, when I was younger, maybe Chris Farley or John Candy. So I kind of know how I'm doing with my own physical weight. If it's closer to like Dan Aykroyd or even Jack Black, I'm okay. If it's more like John Candy or Chris Farley, then I got to hit the weight room again.
Right. Absolutely. And I see here you're a doomer bloomer. So where are you on your hero's journey?
You know, I got to tell one quick joke though before we get
Oh,
more serious.
mm-hmm.
Um, for a while, when I was really getting those Chris Farley references or comparisons, I was working in a movie theater, and somebody came in there and said, "Hey, you look like that guy on SNL." And I'm almost certain they were thinking of Chris Farley. And I just looked at him with a straight face and said, "Yeah, people say I look like Eddie Murphy all the time." And and I don't think the person got the joke, but that was the joke. As far as the doomer bloomer thing, I think that I'm looking for what I like to call the second half comeback. You know, and not to say that my life up until now has been so gloomy. It's just that I do feel that with a physical move of geography was an important part of me kind of taking up a new challenge with my life, which was I moved geographically from the Northeast United States, specifically New England, specifically Rhode Island, uh, towards a warmer climate, and that would be Jacksonville, Florida. And this was about a year and a half ago. And William, a lot of people tend to say things like, when you say that you're going to move, people say, "Well, it's not where you are, it's where you're at, or you can't escape your problems," and all that's true to an extent. But I do feel like without 6 months of ice, snow, and potholes, my life, at least with the weather, is a bit improved. And I think that for me, when we talk about the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell, and even the book that maybe you're familiar with, The Writer's Journey, which was kind of an analysis of the hero's journey as pertains to writing and specifically screenwriting, um, that sometimes a change of location is part of that journey. And sometimes you come home again, and sometimes you don't. Um,
Call to
so,
adventure.
right, right. And for me, I think I was ready at that point in my life, a year and a half ago, to make that journey. And beyond that, I feel like it's been fruitful. If nothing else, the restrictions in Florida are a lot less severe than those in New England for this horrible pandemic. So the people, some family members and some close friends that criticized or second guessed my decision to move out of New England, once it became clear that I'm still able to go see a movie in a movie theater, I'm still able to go to a beach and walk around, and some of my friends and family weren't able to do that over this last year and change, then uh, my decision seems to be a lot wiser to them in retrospect, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. I agree with you. Oftentimes, you need to uproot your life and start a new adventure. I'm kind of about to do the same in my life here because I want to move closer to one of my friends who's more entrepreneurial. Um, and if you're around people who are on that path or looking or striving to get to a better place, uh, it can't hurt, right?
I don't think so. I think change is sometimes good for people, and I think I am getting a little bit of. Sounds like there's some dishes going on or something back there. Will, I don't know what's going on, but I think for me sometimes it's good to move geographically. I don't know if it's particularly healthy for anybody to stay in the same location their whole lives, and I think that society, or some aspects of society, put a lot of emphasis on family or nationality, or you got to stay where you live or sprout where you are seated, or whatever those cliches are. But to me, there's a certain element of safety, or a certain safety and stagnation can overlap, in my opinion. And I
Mm,
think that some people kind of use that feeling that they have to stay in their hometown and be the John Cougar Mellencamp of their hometown or whatever, uh, without really taking a chance and seeing what else is out there in the world.
100%. Do you believe that your vibe attracts your tribe? Is that something, like how have your connections in life influenced your path?
That's a great question. I mean, that's pretty deep too. I mean, I could say that I would probably say there's something to what you just said. Your vibe attracts your tribe. I mean, one thing I can say pretty clearly is that, it's not a big secret that I'm a professional wrestling historian or enthusiast, which to some folks would be ridiculous, a ridiculous thing to be into. But what I've discovered is that some of my best friends in life are also filmmakers who happen to be pro wrestling fans, or they're pro wrestling fans that happen to like film. And so there is some overlap there. I would say that ironically enough, or oddly enough, most of the films that I make really don't have much to do or anything to do with pro wrestling and are on a much higher dialogue driven, intellectual based effect. Things like my short film, The Impeccable, that is about three characters played by great actors, is what I was getting at, who are sophisticated, kind of snobby upper crust people who are engaged in somewhat of a love triangle. Well, that particular short film, which people can watch on my YouTube channel, absolutely has no references to professional wrestling at all. So if people were to watch that film, they would have no reason to think that I'm into wrestling or anything like that. And so I do have different interests, and that's one thing, William. That your statement, "Does your vibe attract your tribe?" I thought was interesting because sometimes you might have different tribes too. You might have different tribes for the different aspects of one's personality or interests.
Absolutely. How many film credits do you actually have to your name, Mike? Because you seem like a fairly prolific filmmaker.
Well, let's thank you for saying that. I would probably say that if you say credits, credit would be different than films that I've actually produced and directed. So for things that I'm actually the guy that kind of manifested a project, I would probably lead people, as far as a feature film, to bloodsugarsidace.com. That's spelled BLOODSUGARSIDACE.com. That was like a 74-minute movie that I wrote, produced, and directed, and with great help from my partner, Tim Labonte, who was a co-producer and director of photography and editor. But we made this movie for about $12,000 that I think is pretty entertaining, and I guess I would say that it doesn't have Will Smith jumping from a burning building or Bruce Willis trying to figure out what's going on in his mind, but I think it's a pretty awesome film that we created with four great actors, and I'm pretty proud of that work. And things like Disregard the Vampire, a Mike Messier documentary, has just won its 11th award, and I think that's a pretty entertaining piece of footage. And some people might hear that title and they think it's a vampire. I'm going around documenting vampires. It's not really the case. It's more of an examination that the vampire word is a metaphor for creativity, or for the creative process, or for the struggles of the creative process. So it's one of those things where if people were to actually watch the movie, whether they're into Bela Lugosi or Hammer horror films or not, they would probably enjoy it. I don't think anybody has watched Disregard the Vampire, Mike Messier documentary, and not enjoyed the movie.
Yes, absolutely. So, I'm just looking at, because you filled out a bit of a survey, um, but what have been the best resources that have helped you along the way?
Here's a good resource that I guess I would give credit to, especially from my time in New England. This lady, Michelle Meek, had this literal website, before social media, that was newenglandfilm.com. And, a true pioneer lady in New England who saw that people needed a way to find out about projects that were happening in New England as far as casting or jobs. And she posted, or HBO actually posted on her website that they were looking for people for a pilot for home box office. And I applied to it. I sent in a tape, and lo and behold, of the thousands who auditioned, I got to what they called the semifinals, the final 11 people for this pilot that was called Candidate 2012. And in that project, there was Jay Roach, who directed Austin Powers and Meet the Parents, and a couple of other big-name people, R.J. Cutler, who I think directed something called The War Room, and another guy, a third partner who's become huge. Of course, I'm forgetting his name. But the point is, HBO flew me out to Los Angeles for this pilot. While I was there, I happened to meet Rick Schroeder and Brooke Shields and Andrew Dice Clay. They were not involved in the project. They just happened to be in Los Angeles while I was there. And unfortunately for me, the pilot did not get produced by HBO. They repackaged it later, and it was sent to Showtime as American Candidate. It was vastly different. And the show really did not do very well, to be honest with you. It didn't make a pop culture impression. But for me, the experience was kind of a nice validation for me in my career. And I took the footage that I used for those audition tapes, along with some other footage of me auditioning for the Jerry Springer show and the WWE's MTV Tough Enough reality show. And I made a short film called Rejected by Reality, which was probably my first kind of selfie type of documentary about me and my own adventures, with a bigger portrait of what is this reality TV show what is this reality show trend doing to people, or their reflections about themselves, or about how they view television, or how they see themselves in the world. And I think Rejected by Reality was one of my first times when I said, man, this thing with HBO didn't work out for me, but what can I do to make it my own? What can I do with this rejection to turn it around and find some good in it? And I think that is kind of a lesson that was planted in me early, which, 15 years later kind of helped with this Disregard the Vampire, a Mike Messier documentary. So there was one thing I read, Will, in one of these screenwriting books or movie-making books. I think it was a movie-making interview book by Laurent Terrard, which basically the quote was, filmmakers are usually making the same film over and over again. And if you look at anything from, I think, Woody Allen, granted, we know more about Woody's personal life now than maybe we want to, but if you look at Woody Allen's neurotic comedies, or if you look at Tarantino's edgy, stylistic films, you could make a case that many filmmakers are making the same movie over and over again. I'm not sure if that answers your question or answers 5 questions, but there you go.
I think it answers 5 questions. I mean, you know what? It's kind of making me feel a little nostalgia for my history of 12 filmmaking course.
Yep.
In another lifetime, I think I would have went to film school.
Yeah.
I still have that. I think that innate creativity inside of me. Like, I have so many unfinished scripts and projects in my computer that I haven't done anything with for close to 10 years. So how long have you been? Because how long have you been doing this for? Like most of your adult life, I guess.
Yeah, I would probably go back to high school, man. In high school, I took, back in my day, we had these things called VCRs, and I took 2 VCRs and hooked them up to a audio boombox that had an audio cassette. analog, you call them the RCA switches. If you ever seen those red, yellow, and white cables, and basically I kind of taught myself that if I wanted to mix a music video, if I took the audio source from the boombox, which would be an audio cassette, and then mix that with the VCR tape video, content, the recording VCR could create a music video. And of course, you'd have to push the pause button and grind all the gears in the VCRs in order to accomplish this, which probably took, some years off the VCRs. But as far as like an analog editing, I basically created my own analog editing system. Ironically enough, when I got older, Will, I don't like to edit. So I don't know, as editing got easier, I started working with editors like my buddy Tim Labonte or Zoe Morgan, who's an editor down here in Jacksonville. I started to shy away from editing, but my original stuff was by editing like Black Sabbath's Iron Man song with the Road Warriors wrestling tag team and making a music video. And then I did one for Elton John's Rocket Man. I had a high school English class assignment, and rather than actually write something or do a presentation to the class, I put the time into making a music video using Elton John's Rocket Man and old war movie footage. And my classmate Brian Mora and I went around and taped some footage with his, at the time, state-of-the-art VCR video recorder. And that footage is on the Mike Messier YouTube channel too, under the archives section playlist. And so the answer would be a very long time.
Yeah, it makes me want to pull out my footage from high school for the film noir project that I worked on.
Well, here's the thing, Will, and I was going to say when you mentioned your computer full of screenplays, I would urge you, if you can now, I would urge you or anyone else listening to this, because I think a lot of people are in that state where they have some type of floppy disk or some type of computer hard drive that has some unfinished novel or script kind of hiding in there. I would urge you to find it, to email it to yourself, to print it. And the thing is, hey, maybe 90% or 75% of that material is not great, but you might be sitting on some real gems there. You might have a real great screenplay or the beginnings of one, or a stage play or a novel or a personal memoir. And I think about this, Will. We think about all the great books that we read, the William Shakespeare's or the Anne Rice's or whatever. But imagine all the great novels and screenplays and stage plays and monologues that are buried in people's computers and the bottom of a stack of poetry books in their closet or their journals from high school or college. Imagine all the wonderful creative narratives that have not been published or produced or shared with the world, not just from Mike and Will, but from everybody who's listening to us. There's probably a lot of great things out there. And today, with things like YouTube and things like, WordPress, websites, and all these things that you can share your stuff and maybe even make a profit, although that may not be the first thing in mind. But imagine all the stuff that people have done that just hasn't been shared with other people.
Yeah, I really subscribe to the idea of create value and if it's interesting or people find value in it, whether you make a profit or not is kind of irrelevant. It's just you get this script. At least I did in my early life, my early late teens, early 20s. Like, oh, you gotta get out there, make a living. If you're not making a living, what are you doing with your life? And you get caught up in the idea of making a living versus building a life, right? And now that I'm 31, I feel a lot of my what I want to work towards, or my purpose in life. I do things like this podcast not because I'm getting monetary value from it. I'm doing it because I genuinely want to help and connect with people.
Right.
And I had no idea what a podcast was, not even 5-7 years ago. And this medium has just opened up so many more avenues and opportunities, I think, for people. Like, and you said YouTube as well. If I go back in the archives of my YouTube, I have that film noir on there. And you're right. And if you are listening, if you're in that, like I said, in a doomer mindset, like, oh, my shit is my crap, the shit I'm writing is crap, or nobody ever wants to see this, like, this will never see the light of day. Just be aware that, there are communities of people out there doing interesting things. And, I think, if you're listening to this podcast, you're in the right community. That's what I'm really trying to build here, is a community of people, artists, creative people, that are, trying to get from that doomer space to the more of the bloomer mindset.
Will, I guess in my form, sorry, excuse me, for what you're saying, I guess probably one of the more serious things I put on the feedback form for being booked on your show, and we haven't gotten there yet, but maybe I'll segue into that, is, for a great portion of my adult life, Will, I was taking prescription medications. And at some point, to be exact, December 30th, 2016, I went cold turkey off of those medications. Now, my statement here is not to encourage or cajole anyone to give up their medications without the consent of a doctor or without discussing with a doctor. All I'm doing is sharing my personal story that these doctors and therapists would have me taking these medications for the rest of my life. And my own curiosity was, well, I didn't really sign up to take these medications for the rest of my life. I never really signed an agreement to take these medications for the rest of my life. I don't know if they're hurting me, helping me, or being indifferent towards me, but I'd like to try a little bit of life without these things. And, well, we're 4 years and change later, and I still haven't taken those meds, and I'm doing okay. And I think that sometimes we buy the sandwich that's available. And if there's a turkey sandwich and we're hungry, we'll buy the turkey sandwich. If there's a medication and we're told to take it, we'll take it. And I don't know if people can learn something from the anecdote I just told, or if I needed to give you more details, but the bottom line is that everyone's own health and well-being and mind is their own responsibility. And I think sometimes we're raised in a society that says obey your parents and listen to your doctors and so forth, which is good, but at a point, you have to say, well, shit, pardon my French, but I'm French, but I have to take responsibility for my own life. I have to take responsibility for my own health, my own mind, because at the end of the day, this doctor or even this parent isn't going to sleep in my mind. That's me. That's my sense of space. And so I think one thing, Will, that people are afraid of, and I'm not sure how we got to this point, I think sometimes people are afraid of personal responsibility and accountability. I'm not saying that I'm any better or any worse, or that I've got all the answers, because I certainly don't. But I do know that from my own personal experience, if I didn't challenge those medications, I don't know if I'd be in Jacksonville, Florida in 80 degrees right now, or I'd be somewhere else not as good for me personally.
I hear exactly where you're coming from, because doctors have been trying to medicate me as well. But what I've been finding is that it's numbing all other areas of my life.
Right.
And it's only been a year or so, but I'm with you on the over prescribed mentality.
Yeah, and it's an unfortunate thing because I think it's almost like a new toy that society had in maybe the late 70s or the 80s or the 90s. I don't know. But the new toy was, hey, if we give these kids Ritalin, or if we give these adults Prozac, or if we give these horny guys Viagra, we can solve all the world's problems. Well, maybe, but maybe not. And I think another thing we have to realize is that the profit margins on a lot of those medications are so high that that's a great motivation to keep people medicated. Um, you know, and we as the consumers is the word. We sometimes take it for granted that these authority figures, whether they're doctors, therapists, the psychology industry, puts a lot of faith in something. I think they call it DSM-5, if I have that right. It's a book.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, I find it interesting. I believe between the DSM-4 and the DSM-5, I believe they got rid of an entire field of handicap, which I believe was like autism or Asperger's. One of those got like eliminated. Something that they were prescribing for or diagnosing left and right. It was either Asperger's or autism, something like that. That between the 4 and the 5, the whole psychological community decided with this DSM-5 book, hey, we're going to change that. We're going to make that a part of this. And so all these people that were being prescribed or told they had something suddenly had something else, or they didn't have anything at all. And when I saw that story, I kind of said, hey, how much faith can we put into these people or this profession if they're just kind of going to change this giant segment of society? It made no sense to me. It really didn't. And I have a good friend who's a psychologist, and he works hard, and he works with kids in the school system. But sometimes we have debates because psychology, if you're going to look at someone and say that they have a mental disorder or a mental condition or a mental disability or an emotional disorder, show me the x-ray to prove that. Well, guess what? You can't. You know what I mean? But if I can tell that same person that if they were to move to a warmer climate and maybe get more exercise or walk 30 minutes a day instead of playing video games 30 minutes a day, if they were to drink kombucha and get their probiotics and get prebiotics, and if they were to go to a movie once a week or twice a week, or if they were to go join a bowling league, if COVID allowed, or you see my point, if you were to make some decisions based on relaxation or your mind, or maybe you're in a bad relationship with a male or a female that's causing you to have problems, if you were to change some of those elements, maybe the medication would not be required.
Well, and that's why I have made, in the doomer bloomer pyramid, the first pillar of that pyramid is always health. Because if you don't have health, you have nothing else.
Right.
Because you can't enjoy the rest of the aspects of your life. Or you're going to have diminished returns on the other aspects of your life, right? Even if you have $1 million in the bank, if you're not healthy in decrepitude, you're not gonna be feeling very good about your life.
Good point.
And it's interesting. You should mention the bipolar and the doctors, right? Like who has a stake in all of this at the end of the day? It's like you said, if you're not taking accountability for it for yourself, no one else is going to, and that's pretty much self-explanatory.
Here's a little quote that you can share with the audience, Will, which is a quote of mine. I think I came up with it. Maybe somebody else did before me, but there's no money in the cure. There's only money in the disease. And
Mm.
without patience, not patience as in waiting for something to happen, but patience as in medical patience, then doctors, insurers, and providers they don't have much of a chance of making a profit. And so, what I'm speaking of now, just to be clear, is not the medical industry at large, but more so the psychology, the therapy, and all that good stuff. And I do just to be clear, I believe in therapy more so than I believe in medical pills. And also, Will, just to be clear, I don't think that medical pills are bad all the time for all the people, but I think each case needs to be evaluated on its own, and everybody has to really take their own case and their own life in their own hands. I'm sure many times medication is good for people, but it really depends on the person and the situation. Um, but you know what? I think a lot of times, like we were saying before, doctors, if you go see a doctor, they're going to give you something. You know what I mean? That's just the way it is.
Yeah, and if you're a doomer right now, like what would be your best advice to getting on the path to becoming a bloomer in life, business, relationships? What would you advise people?
Well, that's a great question, man. I mean, here's one. You know, three things that I might have touched on a minute ago. I think that walking. I mean, we talk about exercise and people do different things for exercise, but one thing that I could probably say is a universal exercise for anybody is just walking. And that's not about lifting weights, and that's not about being on a Pilates class or whatever. That's just a simple walking is great. It may not be it may not be the exercise to help you lose weight the quickest or whatever, but just walking is great. And I do think that there's value in kombucha, which is a drink that has probiotics or probiotic pills. I think a lot of people don't know, Will, that a lot of depression in the mind can be caused by irregular gut lining problems. And a lot of that, when people talk about things like IBS or whatever, uh, that if you had kombucha or if you had probiotics through yogurt, that would help. And then I think the third thing, for me at least, it's going to the cinema and seeing movies. Now I know at this time, movie theaters aren't open everywhere, but for a lot of times they are. Other things that I liked for myself is there's an author named Lawrence G. Balt who writes great books, and one of his books is called Zen and the Art of Making a Living, and he's got other books. He's got more than one, but his books are a lot of fun to read because they have a lot of philosophical insight, but they're presented in a way that you're not going to give yourself a headache from reading his stuff. And I guess beyond that, tune into the Mike Messier YouTube channel. My short film, The Nature of the Flame, is a 7-minute Zen dream short film that people would probably really get something out of if they watched it.
I love it. I'm just reading your biography here. Tell me a little bit more about your brief cameo in Hope Springs with Meryl Streep.
Yeah, that was a nice situation. That's one of those things where um, I went to do extra work, background acting in Connecticut. And this is one of those things where sometimes you do a lot of stuff as an actor that you don't know where it's going to go. And this was one of those things where I guess I had done enough stuff like that didn't go anywhere, where finally I was due for something to be unexpected, like an unexpected surprise. And I went to do extra work in Connecticut for a Meryl Streep movie called Hope Springs that had Tommy Lee Jones in it. And, the day that I got there, that morning, they told us we would, in fact, be in a scene with Meryl Streep. And so my fist kind of pumped underneath the table a little bit. And I remember, Will, that they took us to set, and it was a kind of a cool place. It was in North Stonington, Connecticut. It was like a genuine bar in the neighborhood. It wasn't a film set. It was like a real bar they were using. I didn't wear my glasses for that scene, so when they walked me into the bar, I couldn't really see very well. So there's Meryl Streep and Elisabeth Shue, feet from me, like 10 feet from me, but I wasn't wearing my glasses, so I couldn't really tell if it was them or their stand-ins. And as things are happening, Elizabeth Shue, who Adventures in Babysitting and The Karate Kid and The Saint, I mean, she's got a stacked resume herself. But basically, she was just doing a cameo in this film, and Elizabeth Shue started ad-libbing, and the director liked her ad-lib so much that he created a scene around her ad-lib. And on another moment of fate, they were doing the scene with Elizabeth kind of making fun of somebody in the background. Well, that person was out of the range of the camera. So instead of like moving the cameras to adjust to that background actor and making them the focal point of the scene, the director decided, he just pointed, with his finger above my head, "What's your name?" And I said, "Mike." And he said, "Elizabeth, start using the name Mike." So I'm like, oh my God, I'm actually being used in this scene with Meryl Streep and Elizabeth Shue. So this is the thing, Will, with that situation. I did make the final cut. My scene made the final cut of the movie, which is great. And it's a big thrill, and it's on my acting reel, once again, on Mike Messier YouTube channel. But the thing with that is, I really feel that the reason why out of the 20 or 30 people in the bar as background actors was used for that scene, and probably the 100 people that were called in for extra work that day, the reason that Mike Messier was the one that ended up being in the scene with Meryl Streep and Elizabeth Shue is not because of what it would do for me personally. It's because when I started using that as a credit to promote my acting classes, think about how many more students signed up for my acting classes because they saw the Meryl Streep, Elizabeth Shue, Hope Springs credit. So it wasn't that I got any great financial windfall or I became rich and famous for a 30-second scene with Meryl Streep and Elizabeth Shue. It's that maybe 20 or 30 or 40 people who otherwise may not have taken my acting classes saw some type of glimmer of hope or intrigue for their own career or their own interest in acting because the name value of Meryl Streep and Elizabeth Shue was attached to this guy named Mike Messier. So 30 or 40 lives were therefore affected, hopefully in a positive way, through acting in my classes and then going on to local theater or whatever they did. And that's the type of big picture thinking that I like to have, Will. There's an expression that I also have sometimes, which is try to think the way that God thinks.
Right.
If you believe in God or not, if you were to look at the situation with Disregard the Vampire and say, this narrative was falling apart, and this guy, namely me, decided to transition his narrative film into a documentary film to explore the issues addressed of independent filmmaking. Some people wouldn't see that as that's how God would think. But if you also look at the fact that because of Disregard the Vampire, that led to Messier Mantra, my TV show, of which I probably did 200 episodes and gave a lot of people, the guests on the show, a way to talk about their own projects in a way that they probably had never done before. That also led to my Avalonia Film Festival, avaloniafestival.com, which gave a lot of filmmakers their first award in film, or maybe their only award in film, and gave a lot of filmmakers encouragement and validation to keep on making films, or maybe inspire them to make a film in the first place. So if you see things in a way that's bigger picture than the here and now, then that can be fruitful and interesting.
Yeah, well, and it's funny you should mention think the way that God thinks, right? Because I'm a big proponent of the Tao Te Ching,
Right.
and that was written by Lao Tzu over 200 2,500 years ago. And all the things that you just described, think bigger than yourself, give more than you take, try to live a balanced life, and give back, whether that be, like you're talking about your community, uh, your acting students, your TV show, your Avalon film. It sounds like to me you're a very Tao, whether you realize it or not, you're a very Tao centered leader.
I appreciate that.
And that's why I always include verse 17 of the Tao Te Ching in the in the in the questionnaire. And the question I ask people is, how can one be of service to your community in the world? And that's very individual. So how would you respond to that?
Well, here's another great cliche, but it's true, which is, half of life is just showing up. And I think that's true. And if you want to get a little more deeper than that, what does that really mean? Which is, if you're invited to, and granted, we're in the middle of COVID and pandemic, so I say these things maybe with the asterisk that this would apply more so than when people are vaccinated and safe and all that. But like, say you're invited to a party, show up. Here's the thing: a friend of mine won an award or was nominated for an award from a local theater competition or theater award show, and because he had won so many awards from this theater competition before, he decided not to go to the presentation because he thought it was reeking of arrogance or something. And I took issue with my friend because I said, you're not going to accept this award for your own benefit or your own grandiosity. You're accepting the award for your play on behalf of your wife, your actors, your crew, the audience. Like, if you're a creator, and especially if it's something that's interactive like a stage play, you're no longer just yourself. You're representing all the people that put that thing together. When I win one of these awards, and it doesn't matter if it's a big festival or a small festival, I really make an effort to. The first thing I do, for the most part, is I send an email to the cast and crew of that particular project, and then I do the social media thing. I share it around Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and that's not just for my own benefit, although there's some of that. It's because that the actors and the cast and the crew and the sound guy, my audio guy, Tony Carmadre, the editor, Tim, whoever worked on this particular piece, whatever it is, they get a little bit of a rub. They get a little bit of a victory, and they should get a big victory from that.
Yeah.
So,
verse 17 says, at the end of the day, they say we did it ourselves.
well, yeah, and I love that quote. And it's funny, when you sent that quote, I've heard that quote before because I'm familiar with that book. And to me, it's when you get to the end of the Disregard the Vampire, Mike Messier documentary, you'll see that I quote. I have a great book from a quote. It's too long for me to recite it right now, but the point of it is, if you're a good leader, you provide the template and the tools for the team to accomplish great things. And that's what, whether we're talking, ancient Asian military strategies, or if we're talking trying to make a movie, it's kind of the same mindset, which is not how can you grandiose yourself, but how can you make these people feel good about themselves.
Yeah, it's ultimately it's about standing back and raising other people up. Yeah. So I have one last question for you, and
Please.
it's a bit of a curveball.
Oh boy.
But what is your zombie plan?
Can you explain that a little bit? Is that like when I'm dead or what?
No, if zombies invaded, where would you go and what would you do?
I might just go to the movie theater and hide, and hopefully the movies are still playing.
Bill Murray, nice.
Yeah. I might just go to the movie theaters and hide. I mean, I'm not I'm not going to claim that I can fight a zombie. I mean, I do have a video on my YouTube channel where I claim victory over Brock Lesnar. I'm a mixed martial arts pro wrestler. But the reason why I claim victory over Brock Lesnar is because I challenged Brock to a fight where the condition is if either one of us has ever been proven to have been a steroid user, they will be disqualified from the fight. And since Brock Lesnar has already been proven as a steroid user, and I never have and never will, I claim victory over Brock Lesnar.
By default.
Well, by disqualification, because I'm a non-steroid user, and you can, I was going to get a T-shirt to celebrate this, that a size 3XL T-shirt that read "steroid-free body." You know what I mean? And I'm making fun of myself a little bit, but the point of it with that Brock Lesnar thing, Will, is why do we fanboy or why do we spectator sport ourselves for these athletes, especially fighters, when at the end of the day, are they better human beings than us? And I would probably say no.
I would probably tend to agree with you.
Thank you.
Besides maybe Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, but he's kind of a special case.
He's a cool guy. I mean, I have a lot of time for The Rock, and his father, Rocky Soulman Johnson, was actually a great pro wrestler as well. And the Johnson-Morocco feud of the early '80s is something that probably doesn't get as much love as it should because the Jimmy Snuka. Oh man, you got me talking about pro wrestling. We'll be here all day.
I know how to press people's hot buttons.
And today is WrestleMania day too. I actually went to a live pro wrestling show in Jacksonville last night, the House Always Wins house show. And Brian Pillman Jr. actually partaked in my book launch of A Distance from Avalon, When the Dying and the Dead Reunite. So I am kind of big into wrestling, and there's probably some heroes' journeys in the world of pro wrestling too, Will, I'm sure.
I should start a podcast about it.
Maybe we will, buddy. But I like pro. I didn't know that you were that into pro wrestling, or what extent you are.
I follow some of the bigger names, but I wouldn't say I'm a hardcore wrestling fan, anything like that.
It's not what it used to be. In my statement would be that, in my opinion, that maybe the 70s, 80s, and 90s were the best 3 decades for wrestling, and it's kind of been on a creative slumber for a while, but maybe that lion is waiting to be unleashed. Who knows?
Well, I mean, everything, like we talked about earlier, everything old is new again, right? You're always recycling and rehashing old stereotypes, whether that be fashion or movies or books. You'll never know. Things might just decide to recycle themselves again.
Well, that's true. They talk about the secular things. If you look at this TV show like Happy Days, that was produced in the 70s, but it was about the 50s. So
right.
if people from 2021 watch Happy Day, or even the movie, the music video by Weezer, Buddy Holly.
And then the 70s show was filmed in the 2000s.
Right. So what you have, if you're looking at that 70s show in 2021, you have a double nostalgia. You're nostalgic for the young, hip happening Mila Kunis and the actor there that became Demi Moore's husband there.
Ashton Kutcher.
You're looking at them, and you're having nostalgia for them at their early 20s, but you're also having nostalgia for the 70s, and maybe you're having nostalgia for the early 2000s. And so it's interesting that nostalgia can kind of have more than one layer to it.
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing up some interesting things that you could definitely explore, whether that be in a book, podcast, your own the short film.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've hit another creative phase of your life. I'm glad for you.
Thanks, buddy.
And I'm glad we connected.
Me too.
On that note, I mean, we've kind of plugged it a couple times already, but where is the best place for people to reach you for either acting, your filmmaking, or just generally? Mike seems like a cool guy. I want to get to know him better.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I would definitely just say go to your YouTube machine and put the word subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel, and it'll come up. And then the next thing is MikeMessier.com. And
Done.
if people, thank you. And if people really want to get to know me, or know what I think is my best work that apply, it's a short book, but it's a book. Distance from Avalon: When the Dying and the Dead Reunite. It's available on Amazon.
That's
And
going in the description.
thanks, man. I appreciate that. And I think people, even if they're not into horror, there's enough meat on those bones that non-horror fans will enjoy the book as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thanks, buddy.
Any closing thoughts you'd like to share there, Mike?
Well, I just want to thank you, Will, for the audience. Will was very patient with me today as far as my own technical aspects, and I was a little bit goofy. I got my Saturday and my Sunday confused, so Will was super patient with me. This Matchmaker FM podcast platform, I think we would both thank for getting us in touch together. I went ahead and I put the $99 to be a pro member because the reason is, folks, when there's a website that offers a free version and a pay version, I'll do the free version first. But if it's proving to be successful, and if it's proving to be fun, why not support the company that's providing that platform? Because you want that company to stay in business. So they've hooked me up with you and the other podcasts that I've done, and it's been a lot of fun. So it's a great website. So far, so good.
Like I said, Matchmaker FM is the Tinder for podcasting. So
that's right. That's right.
Gonna shamelessly plug them here.
Well, they deserve it.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been the Doomer Bloomer podcast with Will S. and my special guest, Mike Messier. Thanks for listening. Remember to like, subscribe, share. We have the YouTube channel, the Doomer Bloomers. Our website is the doomerbloomerpodcast.com. Go to /support. Would really help the website. $10 donation would really go a long way to keeping the lights on.
Well worth
it. And we're gonna keep having cool guests like Mike and talking about cool things like Zen and the art of making a living. That's my next read. Thanks to Mike.
You're gonna love it, man.
And we're gonna connect with other doomers and get them to a place of becoming bloomers through the 10 pillars framework. Keep a lookout. I'm going to be trying to get a PDF guide out, but don't quote me on that. But Mike, you've kind of speared me to get to another creative level, so thank you.
Hey, man, you're doing a great job. I'm looking right now, and I'm subscribing to your YouTube channel, and you have 1,000 plus subscribers already, so that's something to be proud of, man. And I think everybody just got to look at the Doomer Bloomers as the official name of your YouTube channel. And you're doing good, man. Good for you, brother.
Yeah, thanks. And have yourself a great and prosperous day and center yourself in the Tao Te Ching.